We're in Mark chapter 8. Good news, bad news scenario here for you. The sermon is only going to be 5 minutes long. That's the good news. The bad news is the intro is probably going to be about 25 minutes long. So it all, comes out in the wash, as my grandmother used to say. The search for truth begins early, and you don't have. It's such a beautiful thing to see the purity of a little kid. And one of the first words that all of my kids learned to say was the word "why," and it was maddening. There were times that I really suspected that it wasn't a real search for truth as much as it was just to get under my skin, because it would be like, well, why is the sky blue? Well, it's because the concentration of the oxygen, and well, why? Well, ultimately because God made it that way. Hush, because you're bugging me. But the beauty of a child's sincere search for truth and what makes the world work, and why does this happen, and is God married, and all of those things. The questions that we put away as adults. I have used the illustration on several occasions that we have this map of reality that we start out as a child, and we're drawing this map of reality, and regularly and with real gusto we get the eraser out and we erase it and we draw in something new that we've learned. But at some point we adults laminate that map and hang it on the wall, and we don't like the idea of having to take the map off the wall and tear the laminate off and start over or erase things. So this idea of trying to find truth, what is the universe really all about, is it's a quest that we begin as a child, but we don't do very well at that as adults, generally speaking. I'm going to tell you something. Those of you who are disciples of Jesus would not likely be disciples of Jesus if you were born in Calcutta. You understand what I'm saying? So this idea that we would be as noble if we were born under other circumstances is just silly. We have the faith that we have, and we have the view of the world that we have because of where we live and the people that we've encountered. And it's that worldview that is something that regularly is challenged in the Scriptures. And so we had a biblical worldview Sunday a few weeks ago, and I'm not going to rehash that, but we are at a place in Mark 8 that really lends itself to going back and revisiting kind of this idea of the worldview. So I want to say that that this idea that we start neutral in our pursuit of truth is not legitimate. I mean, I was raised in a home where my mom and dad were devout members of the Church of Christ. So what are the odds that I'm going to grow up and be a member of the Church of Christ? Well, I mean, they're pretty good. I mean, at least that I'm going to start out that way. Now, I mean, I may change that, as I move along, but we need to understand that the theology that we have is subservient to certain things, like our worldview, for instance. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. And other forces. For instance, God is often referred to as Father in the New Testament, because Jesus introduces this concept, this idea, that God, our Father who art in heaven. Well, if you were raised in a home where your dad was a respectable, honest, hardworking, mom-loving, child-encouraging person, then thinking of God as fathers is a positive thing. If you were raised in a home where your father was abusive or just wasn't there, then thinking of God the Father is not a positive thing. So you can begin to get a sense of how difficult it is for God to get truth past our filters. There's all of these filters that we have, and there's no way for us to exist on this planet without having those filters. I mean, I'm an American. I'm a male, and I'm finding out that being a male has certain liabilities, in the sense that I think about things in a way that isn't really necessarily conducive to being a disciple of Jesus. And the male mentality that I can fix this, for instance, it would be one of those. I don't know, maybe not every male has that, but most of the males that I know, if I call up Dan and I say my truck's broke, Dan says I can help you fix it. And so we kind of have this, we can fix it ourselves mentality, whereas God says you're so broke you can't fix you. So all of these filters exist, and I can't just wish away those filters. And somehow God's got to get truth past all of those filters. Pretty much everything that Jesus did and said targeted one or more of those filters that exist in the human soul, in the human psyche. So, there are 5 big categories that we all are wrestling with. All of us. It doesn't matter whether you're a disciple of Jesus or not. There are 5 big categories that have to be dealt with. Is there a God, and if so, who is He? Who is man? Why do we exist? What is our purpose on this planet? Are we the only ones in the universe? And Christians get all bent out of shape because people talk about, well, maybe there's life on another planet. Really? I mean, that bothers you? Why does that bother you? I mean, doesn't that seem kind of egocentric to think that out of billions and billions and billions of stars, all of which probably have, planets circling around them, that we're the only one, that's got humans or, life on it? I mean, I think God's got a bigger imagination than that. But it doesn't, it doesn't bother me. I don't know why it bothers some folks. What is truth? Is there truth? This is a big deal, a huge deal in our culture right now. There's this mentality that, well, truth really doesn't exist. It's kind of like beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. So what's right for Ralph might not be right for me, and what's right for me might not be right for Ralph. So how do we determine what is right and what is true? Knowledge. With the internet especially, we've reached this place where there's just knowledge overload, but we don't know what to do with it. I heard a comedian the other day, and he did it so much better than I can, but he was talking about the fact that before Google it was okay to not know something. And I love this. I love the whole concept because it's so right that, he said, and I don't remember now what the question was. It was like, what was James Dean's hometown? And, the guy poses the question, and of course, nobody can just say, I don't know. Everybody had to pull out their phones and, look it up, because it's not okay to not know stuff now that Google and the internet exist. Well, but just because we've got all this stuff, all this knowledge, you've got access to, Wikipedia, and I mean, you can just pull up ad nauseum information, but we're no smarter than we were, 50 years ago. We just have a lot of information now that we didn't necessarily have access to. And then, ethics, especially in well, not especially in anything. The ethics boils down to, how do I treat other people, and what ultimately is right and what ultimately is wrong. And I started to say, that's a big deal in the medical world, but I mean, it's just a big deal in any world. And then the 4 basic questions: who am I? Why am I here? What's wrong with the world? Nobody challenges me on this. Everybody knows the world is really messed up. Okay? So, but the real question is, what is wrong with the world? And depending on what your worldview is, now this is critical. If your worldview is that we are all just monkeys that made it good, that we just are evolved to this place of, the top of the food chain, the answer to how do we fix the world is different than if you believe that God created everything and bestowed upon us the image of Jehovah when He made us. And so there's, the survival of the fittest mentality, and then this discipleship mentality, which are very different. And the answer to how we fix the world gets a very different answer depending on what your worldview is. So the good news is there's 2 slides down. See, so I mean I'm moving quickly through the 40. No, I'm kidding. So after all of the filters and the worldviews are all kind of factored in, and there are probably other categories, but you've got the atheistic worldview, which is becoming very assertive lately. There's been an enormous upswing in books written by atheists that aren't just saying Christians are not very smart. They're saying that Christians are evil because we believe in God. Bill Nye, the science guy, back a few months ago, basically made it tantamount to child abuse to teach your children the idea of creation. So you've got this atheistic worldview that's becoming very assertive in the United States. Then you've got agnostics, and basically the agnostics say, well, I don't know, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not a God. I'm not sure what to do with that. Then there's the hedonists, which the hedonistic mentality is I'm going to do everything I can to escape pain, and I'm going to do everything I can to find pleasure. That's what 99.999% of Americans are. It doesn't matter whether we're Christians or not. Americans have been trained from day one to be hedonists. We are all about pleasing self, and we're all about trying to get pain out of the equation. Now, by the way, the theist is not necessarily a Christian. So I'm just going over different worldviews real quickly. The theist, and lately, that's probably not a very good term, over the last 20 years or so, movies come up on occasion that really do a good job of showing this idea that theism doesn't necessarily mean believing in Jehovah. If you saw Avatar, and some of you are science fiction kind of people, and some of you aren't, and that's okay. You can get to heaven without seeing Avatar. But in the movie Avatar, on this planet, the mother God is in everything. It's in the trees. and there's this connection. All of them are all connected, and it would be perfect if it weren't for the capitalistic, folks coming in there to mine the planet. It's a good story. I enjoyed it. In fact, I own the DVD. If you want to borrow it. It was a well done movie, but the interesting thing is the worldview that they're presenting there. is that it's this pantheistic worldview that says that God's in everything. He's in the trees, He's in you, He's in me, and we're all connected. And there's this. So it's a worldview that's been around a long time before Avatar came out. Star Wars it presents another worldview. This idea, Luke. There you go. Use the Force. So there is this power that just is so pervasive in the universe, and if you have the right, watch this, if you have the right knowledge, you can tap into this power, and you can be a very powerful person. But the power doesn't have a name. The power doesn't have a will. The power is just there for you to manipulate and control. Now that worldview's been around a long time too. The Gnostics that John was dealing with in 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, and I think even in the Gospel of John, those folks were Star Wars people. I mean, they hadn't seen the movie, you understand, but they were folks that had that mentality that there's this kind of this impersonal force out there, and if you have the right knowledge, you can tap into it. And then when you get into the Christian worldview, then you've got all sorts, and you guys know this, you've got all sorts of different subclasses of the Christian folks. There's the moralists who believe that it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you intended to do good, as long as you just, love everybody, as long as you are moral, whatever that means, then everything's fine. I call that the John Lennon Christianity, All we need is what? Love. Just kind of everybody, tripping through the tulips or Tiny Tim. Maybe it's a Tiny Tim religion. Anyway, it's a very soft, doesn't matter what you do as long as you intended to do good. Then you've got the God is love folks, and there's the God is law folks. There's the Westboro Baptist Church people who says God hates whatever. You are very likely going to hell, not because you disagree with God, but because you disagree with me. That's kind of that law, God is law mentality. And here's how you know you're going to heaven. You know you're going to heaven if you agree with me. So check with me and I'll tell you. I mean, does the word arrogance, come to mind at some point in that conversation? Alrighty. Yeah. So we're on the last slide. Here's the sermon. I got about 5 minutes, 7, something like that. So I want you to read with me Mark chapter 8, verse 27. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." And then Jesus fires back the most important question that anybody is ever going to have to deal with. Who do you say that I am? All of the isms and the ists out there eventually have to get down to this question. What are you going to do with Jesus? He is... And I need to tell you, guys, I've talked to several people who just blatantly reject Jesus. And they would just say, I'm not a Christian. I don't have any interest in being a Christian. I have never once talked to a rejecter who, when I put the question to them, have you really looked at him? Have you really read what he said? Have you really just paid attention to, the biblical narrative about Jesus? Have you looked at it? Not one of the people who reject Jesus just blatantly say, I've rejected him. Not one of those folks has ever really looked at him. Now, my point is this. Those folks, those people who just blatantly reject Jesus are folks, at least in 100% of the cases that I've dealt with, there are people who have got their head in the sand that have never, ever looked at it. Because I really believe that if you'll take a look, if you take a real good look at Jesus, you'll have a very difficult time just rejecting him. For several reasons. You cannot ignore him. He is not going to go away. Did you guys know that in 1700s, I don't know the exact date, but have you guys heard of the writer Voltaire? That some of you who've had to take, world literature and that kind of thing. So Voltaire was a Frenchman who was very atheistic. And he made a prediction at some point in his life that eventually his writings would replace the writings of the Bible.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
well, yeah. So, but legitimately, he really believed that that humanity would get to a place where they kind of transcended the need for the Bible and for Jesus and all that stuff, and that writings like Voltaire's writings, would replace the writings of the Bible. Voltaire died. That's kind of a shocker. Tom was talking about that, yeah, he died. And not too long after he died, I'm not making this up, the Geneva Bible Convention purchased his home. And the last I heard, now I haven't checked up on it recently, but the last I heard, they were still storing Bibles in Voltaire's home. So this is the guy who says, my teaching is going to replace the Bible, and God's sense of humor, he says, watch this. Up until recently, at least, his home was a storage place for Bibles. God's got a sense of humor. Guys, Jesus isn't going to go away. He's been here for 2,000 years. And he has, and his people have, endured unbelievable persecution. And he's not going away. So, he is the Mount Everest of history. There were 33 years, 2,000 years ago, that absolutely transformed this planet. It changed everything. It changed the calendar system. It changed science. Galileo and Newton, who are kind of the foundational pillars of modern day science, were both extremely devout Christians. And it was so many of the principles that they found in the Scriptures that drove them to do scientifically what they did. So, ethics, the position of women in our culture, the idea of slavery. So much changed because of those 33 years. So, the big question is, since you're not going to be able to ignore it, Jesus is a historical fact. We have more evidence that there was a man named Jesus who lived, who taught, who died, and his tomb was empty the third day. Now, I can prove all of that without ever even opening the Bible. those are historical facts that I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt without ever even opening a Bible. In fact, I can use mostly atheistic, or at least folks who didn't believe in Jesus, I can use mostly their writings and prove those things. So, we have more evidence that there was a man named Jesus who lived, who died, who taught, and whose tomb was empty the third day. We've got more evidence historically for that than we do for Caesar. And I am not kidding you. So we know for a fact that there was a Jesus. The question is exactly what Jesus asked these folks in Caesarea Philippi. Who do you say that I am? And Jesus doesn't give us any wiggle room. So I want to read this one verse with you in John chapter 14. And Jim will step up here and lead us in the invitation song. I want to read the whole context, though. Jesus says, "Don't let your heart be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you, and if I go prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going." And Thomas, who wears the title what? Doubting Thomas, which is so unfair. He was the logical one. He just wanted proof, which the Bible never begrudges him, by the way. Thomas says to him, "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus said, verse 6, "I," what? "am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father," what? "Except through me." So, you may not be benefited much by your association with John Dennis. And then again, you may. I'm not berating myself. I'm just saying that ultimately the only thing that's going to get you saved is not a building or a group of people or a preacher. It's going to be what? It's going to be Jesus. He says, "I am the way, the truth, the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me." So, if this is true, then nothing else matters. If this isn't true, nothing matters at all. So the answer to the question, who is Jesus? Who do you say Jesus is? Is he the way, the truth, and the life? Well, no, but he was a really good guy. I mean, Jesus doesn't give you that wiggle room. There is no wiggle room there. Either he was who he said he was, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me," or he was a liar and demonic. Okay, so let's don't kid ourselves. Jesus never intended to give you any wiggle room on the, well, he was a good guy, but, he wasn't, Jehovah. He was either Jehovah in human flesh, or he was diabolical, to say the very least. Who do you say I am? Good question. Jim, come lead us in invitation song.